picture this. You haven't eaten in 2 days. You know exactly where the herd is. You tracked it yesterday, you've got the prints, and the entire route is basically mapped out in your head. Literally, all you have to do is get there. And then it starts raining. Now, I'm not talking about a light, refreshing drizzle. I mean a heavy, soaking, wind-driven downpour that just does not quit. It goes all day, all night, into the next morning, and it's still hammering down. You can't hunt. You can't even see the tracks anymore because the mud just washed them away. Moving through the open is out of the question because slipping barefooted on wet rocks means a twisted ankle. And out here, a twisted ankle is a death sentence. The river's rising, your fire is barely hanging on, and you aren't just bored, you are completely trapped. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're exploring the absolute survival crisis that rain posed for ancient humans, and how being locked down by the weather actually sparked some of the most incredible technological and cultural innovations in human history.
Okay, let's dive into this. Think about what you do today when it rains. You probably close the window, maybe brew some coffee, grab a cozy blanket, and just fire up Netflix, right? Rain is nice, it's background noise, it makes us feel calm. But for a human being living 50,000 years ago, that exact same rain, the very same sound you fall asleep to, was a massive, immediate, life-threatening crisis. It was a brutal force of nature that could take you out before the storm even broke.
So how exactly did it kill? Well, it mainly came down to 3 distinct threats. First up, rapid hypothermia. Without waterproof gear or a modern insulated house, a long storm drops your core temperature dangerously fast. And yes, even in Africa during the wet season. Second, sudden flash floods. Our ancestors spent a lot of time in caves at the base of hills or right next to rivers. Archaeologists actually find these thick layers of flood sediment directly inside occupied caves, which proves that water would suddenly just surge in while people were actively living there. But the third threat, man, this one is terrifying. Rain drove the local wildlife into shelter too. And unfortunately, the shelter those predators were looking for was often the exact same cave you were hiding in. The weather aggressively compressed humans, their prey, and some seriously deadly predators into the exact same tiny, dry spaces.
To put the cold into perspective, we have to talk about this massive 25x multiplier. This is the immediate physiological threat of just being wet. A wet human loses body heat up to 25 times faster than a dry one. So if the temperature outside drops below 50 degrees Fahrenheit and you're soaking wet from a relentless storm, your core temperature is plunging into hypothermia territory within hours. It was a literal race against the cold.
And, if the cold didn't get you, the neighbors probably would. The archaeological evidence for this is absolutely chilling. Down in South Africa, there are these cave sites where human remains and large cat remains are buried in the exact same ancient dirt layers. And among those finds, human skulls with puncture marks that perfectly match the teeth of leopards. It's a really stark reminder of the sensory terror our ancestors were dealing with. Imagine being trapped in the dark, you're shivering from the damp air, listening to the rain, and you realize you're sharing that tiny space with a cornered, panicked apex predator.
Section 1. Keeping the fire alive, the ultimate priority. In the middle of all this chaos, one job mattered above all else. You see, creating a fire from absolutely nothing was incredibly difficult before about 40,000 years ago. Controlling a fire that already exists versus sparking a brand new one from scratch are two completely different ballgames. Because losing your fire meant almost certain death, ancient humans relied on something called tinder fungus. It's basically this woody mushroom that acted as a prehistoric biological lighter. You'd pack smoldering coals inside it, it would catch the spark, and then it would safely smolder inside itself for hours while you traveled. And we know this for sure because when scientists discovered Ötzi the Iceman, the famous 5,300-year-old frozen guy in the Alps, he actually had a dedicated fire kit right in his belt pouch, complete with tinder fungus, flint, and iron pyrite.
So when that week-long downpour finally hit, the group had to initiate what was essentially a high-stakes fire rescue protocol. Step 1, immediately move those precious embers deeper into the cave, away from the flooding entrance. Step 2, aggressively shield the delicate flames with animal hides or brush. And step 3, feed it, methodically. You'd have to scramble to find dead, lower branches protected by the tree canopy, split open soaking wet logs just to scrape out the tiny bit of dry wood inside, and use birch bark for kindling. Birch bark is an absolute lifesaver here because it contains a highly flammable chemical called bircholin, which actually burns even when it's completely wet. Literally, one person's entire job for days on end would be sitting right next to that fire, feeding it and shielding it. Because that fire wasn't just heat. It was light, it was safety, it was life.
Section 2. The Bad Weather Workshop. Let's move to and see how this builds, because once the fire is secure and that initial panic subsides, you're left with nothing but firelight and a whole lot of time. So what do? Well, you make things. We're looking at a timeline of massive technological innovation, all discovered in the exact spots where someone would have been sitting near the firelight in a cave. Going back 100,000 years at Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists uncovered a complete ochre processing workshop. We're talking abalone shells used as mixing bowls and bone tools used to stir pigment. Someone sat there, trapped inside, manufacturing paint. Jumping to 61,000 years ago, delicate bone needles with tiny drilled eyes start showing up. Think about it. You don't craft a microscopic bone needle while you're running from a mammoth. You make it when you're sitting perfectly still, highly focused with hours of downtime to kill. And by 52,000 years ago, at Abri du Moraz in France, we get the oldest direct evidence of twisted plant fiber string. Building right on top of that string invention, we find this absolute marvel from Hohlefels Cave in Germany. It is a 35,000-year-old tool meticulously carved from mammoth ivory, featuring 4 holes and spiral grooves. It's literally a dedicated rope-making machine. Making rope is a slow, tedious, highly repetitive task that requires immense patience. It is the perfect bad weather task. And just think about how much rope changed the world. Snares, traps, tying shelters together, binding stone tools to wooden handles. An incredible amount of human technology runs on string, and it was likely perfected by people trapped inside, just waiting for the rain to stop.
And hey, they weren't just making tools, they were upgrading their homes too. At Sabudu Cave in South Africa, roughly 77,000 years ago, humans were crafting some surprisingly elaborate bedding. They'd build these base layers out of sedges, rushes, and grasses just for comfort. But the real stroke of genius? They topped it off with Cape laurel leaves, which actually act as a natural insect repellent. So during these forced staycations, people weren't merely surviving the weather. They were practicing early pest control and deliberately making their living spaces more comfortable. They'd even periodically burn this bedding just to keep the cave clean and hygienic. Section 3. Art and the social network.
Now, as we transition away from the practical survival tools, we hit a turning point that's honestly a bit unexpected. All that rope and bedding, that's the practical stuff. What came next during these long, rainy lock-ins was something else entirely, the dawn of figurative art and complex social culture. Just look at the magnificent Chauvet cave paintings in southern France. These are 36,000-year-old paintings of lions, horses, and rhinos, and they show an understanding of anatomy, mid-stride movement, and perspective that still blows experts away today. But here's the crazy part. These paintings aren't at the entrance of the cave where you'd casually sit to watch the storm. They are deep inside, sometimes hundreds of meters through narrow, pitch-black passages. Someone literally had to carry animal fat lambs into total darkness, set up their gear, and paint for hours. It really begs the question, why on earth crawl hundreds of meters into a pitch-black tunnel just to paint? Well, nobody does that when the weather's perfect. You do that when you can't go outside. You do it when the rain has been falling for a week, you've already sharpened every tool you own, and you finally have the time to crawl into the dark and create an absolute masterpiece from memory.
And art wasn't the only thing born in the glow of the firelight. When you cram 15 to 30 people in a confined space for days at a time, what happens? You talk. There's this fascinating 2014 study by anthropologist Polly Weissner on the Kalahari Bushmen, and it reveals a massive shift in human behavior based on the time of day. During the daylight hours, conversations were overwhelmingly practical, complaints, organizing resources, discussing land rights. But at night, gathered around the fire, over 80% of the conversation completely shifted to stories, songs, and ceremonies. The firelight softened their faces, reduced the day's tension, and created a unique, safe space to really open up. In a way, the prehistoric campfire became humanity's original social network. So, the crucial point is that the talk around these prehistoric fires wasn't just idle gossip. They were actively transferring critical, life-saving data. Things like where water sources dry up in the summer, where to find the absolute best flint deposits, and advanced techniques for tracking specific animals. This was vital survival knowledge being downloaded from one brain to another. And beyond just the practical tips, there was oral history. Some of the oldest known oral traditions that we've actually verified against real geological events are Australian Aboriginal stories that describe sea level changes from roughly 7,000 years ago. That kind of deep, generational cultural memory only survives if a group spends an enormous amount of time sitting together, retelling those stories over and over, while the rain just hammers down outside. Rainy days were transmission time.
Section 4. When the storm breaks, the silver lining.
Now, the rain definitely forced humans into cramped isolation, but what happened when the storm finally broke? Surprisingly, it provided a massive, world-altering competitive advantage. Think about it. Before the rain, the ground is bone dry. Water is scarce and prey is incredibly hard to track. But after the rain stops, the ground is soft and muddy, revealing perfect, deep, detailed tracks that tell you exactly how fast an animal was moving and exactly when it passed by. Clean drinking water fills up all the little rock depressions, some of which early humans actually carved out to be deeper so they'd hold even more water. And the food supply completely transforms overnight. In tropical Africa, termites swarm right after heavy rains. They are incredibly protein-dense, they require literally zero weapons to catch, and early humans undoubtedly gorged on them. The groups that truly understood how the rain changed the landscape walked out of that cave with an unbelievable advantage.
Our ancient ancestors just didn't experience boredom the way we do today. When you're trapped in a cave and your actual survival depends entirely on what you can make with your own two hands, you don't get bored. You get incredibly creative. Every piece of clothing, every carved tool, and every breathtaking cave painting came directly out of that forced prehistoric downtime. So, if the very foundation of human technology and culture was built while waiting out the rain, what exactly are we losing today when we just sit around staring at our screens? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep wondering, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.